Well, hello and welcome to foundation number 5 of this series on the 12 foundations of Unitive psychology. And for those of you who have seen the introduction, which is called The Cosmology of the Soul, and for those of you who have been with us along through the first 4, welcome back. And by the time we do 6, we're at the halfway point, really. So in recognition that these are difficult linguistically to hang on to in a brief reading like what we're doing, I'm reminding you again that these are available in the book called The Third Covenant. Is this an excuse to market my book? Of course it is. All right. So, on a much less cheerful note, another slaughter this week, this time in Texas, 23 dead. 26 dead. And I don't know how many wounded, do you? No. And it gets to a point where I become almost inured to it. It's like it's like living in a war zone, I guess, and that's really what it is. We bomb them, they bomb us in a different way, and we bomb them again, and they bomb us. And we're going to talk about that today in this foundation number 5. So I'm going to read it first, as always, and I'm going to give a little talk from the psychological point of view before we begin the actual foundation to explain why I'm doing it this way. This is a brand new psychology, and one that is trying to gather up in a unitive way the field of psychology and critique it some, but nonetheless affirm that right now it's what we've got, and there's certainly a need, but also to really question the foundations of it based on the words we use to describe it. Number one, I'm a word guy, I'm a poet, but also to add to it what I believe is missing and the cause of our inability to come up with answers socially to the difficulties that we face, so that these slaughters continue, because it's clearly what my teacher Thomas Berry called a cultural pathology. It really and truly is a cultural pathology. And until we're able to get a grip on the order of magnitude of what's going on, it will just remain ego psychology. That each person has this disorder, they're in the DSM-4, this is why they do what they do, and so on and so forth. And that is not working because it doesn't address the order of magnitude of what's going on. Because not only is the culture disintegrating, but so is its context in the North American continent. In a strange way, that which we call the United States is really a series of ideas captured in the Constitution and elsewhere. But North America, how about North America? Without the United States, North America still is. Without Mexico, North America still is. Without Canada, North America still is. How is the continent? How is the continent? And if we're not, as counselors of any sort, of any guild, if we're not defending the context of our clients, then ultimately we're betraying their deeper interests. And it's not that we have to deliver these lectures in our sessions, it's that the client needs to know that we're in defense not only of their life, their ego strength or whatever, but also the context in life through which that is maintained and brought to a higher level of functioning. We've betrayed them if we don't take into consideration their larger concerns. And that's really what the problem has been politically. From the baby boomers forward, the young people have not been given charismatic leadership with vision, not just with understanding and statistics. But I was thinking last night, I saw this guy running for governor. He's a really good guy. His last name is Marchand. I can't remember. Steve, David, I don't know. His last name is Marchand, Marchand. And I was at a talk with him. And I was thinking after, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And it's clear he's 43 years old, married, 2 girls. And has 2 girls. I was thinking, his presence is there. You can really feel that this guy's concerned. It's not just a gimmick to try to get votes. He's concerned. And he's 43, which makes him a lot younger than someone like me at 70, the baby boomers, Hillary, Bill Clinton, all of them. He's more the next flow of American ideas after the Obama years, really, and before this abomination that we're presently living through over the last year. I'll talk about that more later. But what's missing is that vision. The other day I put up in my study, I have these huge pictures of John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and also of Obama with the Pope. And Obama and the Pope are both laughing. Obama's back like that with that big splash of white as he's laughing. And the Pope, too, is looking at him mischievously like he just told him an off-colored joke or something like that. I mean, that's just my fantasy. But I'm thinking of the vision that's in just the beginning of Kennedy's inaugural address, let alone the rest of the speeches of him and Bobby, just saying this: let it be known to friend and foe alike that the torch is passed to a new generation of Americans. Feel that? Or, let the word go forth from this place that the torch is passed to a new generation of Americans. In that, he's not saying, this is what we're going to do educationally, this is what we're going to do in terms of healthcare, this is what he's not doing that. What he's doing is he's giving us all a feeling of bigness, of openness, of expansiveness. And I've offered to talk with this guy, Marchand, and to try to impart that, especially with regard to addiction, because we're not getting to the root. And the reason we're not getting to the root is that we're looking only at the body. That's the medical model. We're not really dealing with the psycheology, the psyche logos, the way of the soul, that which holds the soul together. We're not dealing with that. And that's why the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous cannot be marginalized. That's the answer. Now, there's certainly physical aspects to it, and we thank the medical establishment for addressing those. They always have, right from the beginning, but that is not where the problem resides. It's a problem of values, and values come from the soul. Now, if you don't believe in a soul, then you're fine with trying to do it with the body. But in alcohol or drug addiction, you can detox somebody over and over and over again. The body's free of the drug, and they're right back on the street. The compulsive overeaters, you can put a clamp on their stomach, they lose 150 or 200 pounds, and then they start eating again. Why? Because the mind is not changed, because the soul has not changed the cognitive cortex, the affective cortex, and the instinctual cortex in its functioning. So, anyway, there's another slaughter. And we're in a vast cultural pathology, and we've got to get the order of magnitude. Got to understand the order of magnitude. It's not moral weakness in John Moriarty over here or this guy over there. Frankly, for me, I told him publicly, I said, I'm 39 years clean and sober. I don't care who knows. I'm proud of it. Not ego proud, just grateful to have had a normal life. Sober since 31. So, there's conflict, and that's clear in the slaughter. There's something conflictual going on. So here we start the fifth foundation. Conflict and creativity are both present throughout the created order. Individual, interpersonal, international, intercultural, and ecological violence in the human derive from the inadequate understanding and inadequate skills needed to properly address this universal conflict. The emergence of hatred and evil, two words we're going to consider toward the end of this talk, the third part of it. The emergence of hatred and evil are the extreme results of this ignorance and deficit in skills. So there's certainly plenty of conflict around. We can't miss that if we're looking at all. We must begin again. What my son-in-law and friend Ian is doing in Wisdom Rap, we together are doing in this project on unitive psychology. It was a great breakthrough when Carl Rogers came up with the client-centered counseling idea. Unitive counseling still bases the gains on the client, certainly, but can now make the focus of the preparation for the work the counselor. And I don't mean some little master's degree somewhere and a few A's and B's and all of a sudden that's it. That's not what I'm talking about in unitive psychology. We can call the counseling aspect of unitive psychology counselor-centered therapy. When I spoke nationally on the topic of psychology and religion, there was usually at least one person in that group, and these were all doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists, MSWs, addiction counselors. All the guilds were always represented. But at least one person would always ask me for something that they can add to their counseling practice, something to take home with them. My answer was seldom satisfying for them, but was nonetheless true in my opinion, according to the rubrics of unitive psychology. All you have to give them is deep presence, what I'm giving you right at this moment. Deep presence in what we say and in what we hear. We really listen, and we give what comes out will represent the level of consciousness we're functioning at. And that level of consciousness will create a response in the soul of the client, and they will begin to understand that we're functioning in one universal soul, and they're a dimension of it. In other words, they'll heal and come into the truth, which is the same thing. If we do so, we bring the universal psyche logos, the way of the psyche, that which holds the psyche together. And they'll understand that like the counselor, they are a manifestation of that psyche logos, so they can awaken to it themselves, and there is no trick. There's no trick. And I would say that city after city after city, there's no trick. There is only the spiritual authority of one person, the counselor, allowing the client to awaken to his or her common soul. In doing so, We bring to them the cosmologos, the geologos, the biologos, and their own psyche logos. You prepare for this flow through gift giving, because that's what it is. It's a gift that comes from the one soul in which your own soul is functioning and is a manifestation of. And they feel that and begin noticing and identifying in themselves what that is. And they awaken. And so what happens is ultimately they become the next teacher, the next counselor. They're not supposed to be a funding mechanism for us. The very first word that we ought to be able to say to them is that someday we say goodbye. They're coming there for a reason, and it's not for us to get wealthy. That's not what it is. So you prepare for this flow through gift giving by a lifetime of spiritual focus and the doing of the way of the 12 steps. And I'm going to take a lot of flack for this, and I'll be, ridiculed or whatever. What, we're all addicts now. No, most of us are, one way or another. But no, it's just that this is something new that's in every country on earth. We're convergent over the planet. We're in every country except a couple of rogue nations. How do we begin again? By dying and rising. And I'm not talking about reborn. It's not what I'm talking about. We're dying and rising again. We're dying to the ego that must be built as a child and an adolescent. We're dying to that. And we're awakening to the depth of the soul, which is the depth of the entire universe. The way of the 12 steps is the unitive psychology methodology for death of the ego and rebirth of the soul. It's the most effective one I've ever found. So I'm going to move on now, having said that, to deal with the first part of the of foundation number 5, which is conflict and creativity are both present throughout the created order. Conflict is as ubiquitous as gravity. You might as well try to outlaw gravity as outlaw conflict. It's everywhere, even in whatever we chew, we're violating the integrity of that particular product between our molars or tearing it with our canines. There is no way out of it. Yeah, one might prefer a carrot to a hot dog, but nonetheless, we're grinding the biosphere in order to have it flow through us and take from it through assimilation what we need to maintain form, to maintain our place in form. Conflict and creativity, however, are cyclic. Once again, they reflect the yin and yang in that they flow into each other. Conflict always leads to a greater creativity. Does that mean we want to create more conflict so we can be more creative? No. That's the whole point of this particular foundation. There are skills that we need in order to come out of the cycle of violence and have the second half of the cycle show up, which is creativity. So in some way, I think unitive psychology is a product of the conflict in me being completely overwhelmed at times by the depth of the culture of pathology we're experiencing. The sacred darkness gave way to the sacred light in what we call the Big Bang. There again is the yin and yang. There is this movement from the sacred dark to the sacred light. And those of you who have seen the last 2 of these foundation recordings, you remember the model that I gave in order to understand that. And I truly believe that the model was given to me. I didn't create the model. I believe it's a useful model to describe the mind of God. and how it functions universally. That's what I truly believe, because I experienced the flow-through of that particular model through me. I didn't construct it. It was revealed. So part of the evolution of galaxies, for instance, includes the collapse, the implosion, and explosion of first-generation stars. Our own star, the sun, is a prime example of the explosive violence followed by enormous creativity called a solar system and a galaxy. Our own planet emerged out of the post-nova disk of transformed stardust, along with the rest of the planets, moons, and asteroids. Born in fire, the planet is still hot and molten at its core. Volcanoes remind us this from time to time. And our own internal volcanoes. We seldom think about our own pain and creativity as a function of us as geological constellations ourselves. We have these hot feelings come up, both creatively and destructively. And they too are a form of volcanism. They are the awakening inside of us of that which is going on throughout the entire planet. We are the planet. And I believe that's the next foundation, is self-reflection. Subsurface volcanic activity likewise reminds us of the tsunami waves, along with tsunami waves, that things are still going on down below. And it's no surprise that the interior of the planet is what in our earliest imaginings would be a fiery hell. I think Dante took it a little over the edge, but it's not a surprise that if we feel that fire in ourselves, that we would think somehow that that's present, and it's certainly been used by several different religions in order to scare the bejesus out of a lot of people. The natural and human toll on ecosystems by volcanism, tidal waves, windstorms, and all of that, as well as civilizational structures, the destruction to ecosystems and civilizational structures, also remind us that whole ecosystems are swallowed by these various violences and then give birth to new ones. A single generation beyond something that happens like, what's the Roman city? I forget the name of it at this point. Pompeii. That right after that, the olive groves begin once again in soil that is composted from that which came forth from the volcano. So what begins as a terrible conflagration and mass killing turns into new life, new creativity. And we see that in our own lives. The stuff we fear the most, when it's faced, becomes creative. Now, that's easy to say. It's another thing doing it. The green plants then appear and make ready the food for herbivores, the cattle. Herbivores are eaten by carnivores, and omnivores eat it all. Detrivores are the cleanup guys following all phases of the biospheric banquet. It all happens over and over again, and there again is the cycle: conflict to creativity. And at least one master has left us a remembrance ritual designed to draw light from the paradisal nighttime cosmos and make it into food in the daytime cosmos. Quanta from the nighttime cosmos are ignited by intention, not by ordination, unless you consider the ordination direct from God, which is the order of Melchizedek. As it appears, he was a friend of Abraham and was compared, Christ was compared to him by St. Paul in the letter to the Hebrews, along with other places. So it's by intention that we feed light into the daytime cosmos. It is not by some human system in the order of Melchizedek, in which I participate and believe myself to have been ordained. It's a universal. It's almost identical to the Bodhisattva vow, that we're a permanent fixture in the daytime universe. The body that we occupy changes, and it comes in to be re-embodied, in a sense. The soul creates another form, and that's awakening. That's what awakening is: direct relationship. So in these matters, quantum mechanics becomes a kind of theology. It seems that Melchizedek of old, our friend here, of Abraham, from the land of Ur, knew this. And this eternal and infinite priesthood sprang forth in his name. And it's in both the Old Testament, right at the beginning, while the Tanakh, I don't like the Old Testament, that's got a judgment in it, Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, Abraham is right there at the beginning, coming from the land of Ur, U-R. But it's also right there, Christ is compared during his lifetime to being a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And then St. Paul, who I'm not always that crazy about, really winds out with this thing in Hebrews. And the explanation is that Melchizedek is considered the eternal priest of righteousness, the eternal priest of peace, the eternal priest of justice. And it's all right there in both the Tanakh and the Christian Bible. It's right there. And it's a transcendence of what was then called the Levite priesthood, which is also the transcendence of contemporary priesthoods into a mystical priesthood ordination directly by spiritual authority and the presence of God. So, these masters and their skills are not to be trivialized, especially in times like our own. Conflict creates skills, but skills must be made. This again is a foundation idea in unitive psychology. Conflict can create skills in responding to the conflict. But skills must be made into neurological habits, both individually and culturally. And presently, the skills we must learn and are most needed are to be found in the way of the 12 steps. They boil down to these 5. Breaking denial by telling the truth about oneself and the world one finds oneself in. Total surrender to the sacred as one understands the sacred. Confessing the contents that have been repressed by denial. Making restitution for all harms done as much as possible. And helping others to understand and practice the way of the 12 steps. So that's the first statement. That completes the first statement of Foundation 5. So here again now, here's the second one. Individual, interpersonal, international, intercultural, and ecological violence in the human derive from the inadequate understanding and inadequate creative skills needed to properly address this universal conflict. It's not going to go away, as I said. It's part of the created order. It is there and is as true as gravity. There is no erasing it. What there is the recognition, beginning with ourselves, and imparting that understanding in truth and in presence to others. How do we list all the detrimental and violent things we do to ourselves? Impossible is the very sad response. suicide and addiction, including technological addictions, merciless self-talk, frenetic lifestyles, destruction of our own ecosystem. It's like urinating in your own refrigerator. Destruction of our own ecosystems through self-intoxication, familial breakdown resulting from it, guilt, personal poisoned water, air, and soil, mad politics, fundamentalisms of all sorts, and this is to name only a few of what we do to ourselves. Perhaps the most difficult skills we need to internalize surround a real, not a fake, not some cheesy ego patch, but a real decency toward ourselves. Narcissism is counterfeit love of the self. It's counterfeit. It is the opposite, the antonym of decency. The unitive psychologos springs from the souls in all individuals, and not only individuals, but the Latin word for soul is anima, and so also in the animals that we've come to think of as machines that we can cut up and that their pain isn't real. We cannot hope to form friendships by violating and betraying our friends. And we do that in our mad search for the trinkets offered to us by materialism and the advertising agency which lives parasitically on the production of trinkets, while others are without food, shelter, and clothing. International peace cannot arise from mutual bombing. As the Beyond War organization tried to teach us during the 80s and 90s, we must outgrow war as we know it. We must invest the United Nations with a per capita international standing army, standing navy, standing air force, and standing coastal guard. Those standing armed forces must be tasked with putting out conflict among nations wherever it arises. Nuclear and chemical arms must simply be outlawed by the UN and enforced with this global force that is under their control. No armies but one, the UN. Bullying is bullying, whether in the schoolyard or in the international arena or in the political establishment. Pretend divine right wannabes always end up subject to the circle of enemies they themselves created. We don't have to risk global conflagration while listening to lies and boasting. With the way of the 12 steps revealed, we can begin to transform religious language from talk like the kingdom of God, which is the only language that would have presented itself to the gospel writers 2,000 years ago. They didn't have liberal democracies around. So they would say, indicating that God is in charge, they would use the word kingdom of God. And the divine right kings drew from that their own counterfeit legitimacy, with a very few exceptions, counterfeit legitimacy from that term. What we need is a term called the democracy of God. The democracy of God. And that is what the 12-step fellowships are. They're functioning democracies. Psychological democracies, spiritual democracies. And true democracy is itself a skill. That's what I'm talking about. And one of the foundation ideas in all the 12-step fellowships is that there is no ultimate authority in any of them except for a loving God expressed through the group conscience, the agreement. It's radical democracy, and we're in every country on earth. We're moving toward a democratic awakening at the planetary level if we can use this spirituality/therapy in order to awaken just a fraction of the people, because that's all it's needed to change cultures. So ecological sanity is another skill to be learned, and fast. The U.S. Constitution emerged from the sacred source of the created order. Whatever the source of the created order is, that is the legitimacy that the Constitution claims. The only guarantee is the guarantee of God in finding these things self-evident: life, liberty, and the pursuit of property / happiness. They've become conflated. So we Americans, the goal of being an American is to be the prototype of that understanding. The real calling of the United States is to come up with the skills of global understanding, a united, not politically united. Each of them will remain their separate nation states. But the skills of living with different races and different beliefs and different systems without the threat of global conflagration. That is what it means to be an American. That's what it means. And we have the opportunity to do so because every nation on earth is present in our population. They're all here. We've just got to learn how to get along with each other and document those skills so that the rest of the world can benefit by what we have as a privileged people. We are called by God, and the language in the Constitution says, and nature's God, to build the skills of global, cultural, and ecological justice. It's right in the Constitution. Nature's God is the way it's talked about. What we ourselves have done to the native peoples on this continent, and through the slave trade to African peoples, is a blasphemy by any code of morality in any tradition. What we have done to the planet is an even greater blasphemy because it denigrates life itself. We must elect representatives in the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branches of our government who do not utilize our Constitution to distort its deeper values. I'm going to repeat that because that's one of the skills. We must elect representatives in the judiciary, legislative, and executive branches of our government who do not utilize that same Constitution to distort its deeper values. Presently, the Republican Party of American politics violates the spirit of our democracy, promoting or at least turning a blind eye to obvious racism against the native peoples and all peoples of color. By unleashing a tsunami of evils against the natural systems of North America and elsewhere, we have done so ultimately to the whole planet. By doing that, we've done so everywhere because the soil doesn't recognize national boundaries, the water doesn't recognize national boundaries, the air does not recognize national boundaries. Ask any astronaut. It's one system. There are no fences. It flows into itself everywhere. If they represent anyone at all, it would be the corporations, and those corporations pay them to do so. The Republican Party. Well, I guess it's better as a question. Has the Republican Party come to more resemble a crime family than a representational political party? They've developed poisonous skills of hatred and division. And as the leaders absorb the terrible, I don't know even what to call it, the terrible downward flow or trickle down, as the political establishment absorbs the gushing down more than trickle down from the corporations to them, they block any drippings, or at least try to, even drippings, not trickles, drippings, crumbs under the proverbial gospel table to reach the most vulnerable among us. They still, unsatisfied, open the natural systems and weaker nations to even further exploitation. The Constitution is designed to overthrow parasitical government by achieving a deeper consciousness and letting that consciousness affect the vote. But guess what? We have to vote. We have to vote. Democracies are totally without power unless it emerges from a collection of growing souls. Or we can continue to witness the collapse of the culture built on that Constitution, our Constitution, our Constitution, ours. So, here's the last statement. The emergence of hatred and evil are the extreme results of this ignorance and deficit in creative skill, which always seek unity. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I can pledge my allegiance to that. Our difficulty is, we all know it's not true anymore, if it ever was. It is the goal of the American people, whether or not they've ever really considered it, to exhibit that. That's the wonder, O-N-E-D-E-R, the wonder of the U.S. Constitution. It's a sacred document. It's almost like the fifth gospel, something like that. Another sutra, a new sutra, another chapter to the Bhagavad Gita. And the truth of the matter is, it's actually there in the Tao Te Ching. It's explained. The relationship between the big nation and the little nation, the powerful nation and the weak one, is all laid out in the 88 verses of the Tao Te Ching. The heat is right. Well, we Americans find ourselves, we've become the ingredients of a very toxic soup of hatred cooked up by evil and cowardly chefs. The heat is rising in the pot, and the stench fills the whole house of government. In nearly all of my books dealing with these issues, I have included the following passage from a book called People of the Lie by Dr. M. Scott Peck. And here at the closing months of 2017, this question has never been more pertinent or meaningful. To my mind, the whole of the year 2017 can be referred to as the year of the great blasphemy. So this is a diagnosis of that blasphemy. Dr. Peck has said elsewhere in the book that there are two internal psychic radar systems in our souls that warn us of the presence of evil. They are, 1, deep confusion. Lies that keep on coming so fast that we lose and become confused over what the truth actually is. We say, am I missing something here? And the next one comes, and the next one comes, and the next one comes. So we're in a state of radical confusion. That's number 1. If you feel like that, note it. Note it. Number 2, deep revulsion. A deep sense of, an interior expression of nausea. A nausea so deep that it was hard to even find the word to describe it. It's a spiritual nausea, and it floats through the nation like the plagues of Egypt. And that nausea is felt at the presence of a person hideous from within. It is not about an external hideousness. The revulsion is an interior response to an interior hideousness. And so I personally have lived with both feelings churning within me, and I know why. Consider the passage below from M. Scott Peck's People of the Lie. It's on page 129 of that book. And so this is him introducing what he calls the 4 rubrics for diagnosing evil in the human personality. So he starts this way. The time is right, I believe, for psychiatry to recognize a distinct new type of personality disorder, to encompass those I have named evil. In addition to the abrogation of responsibility that characterizes all personality disorders, this one would specifically be distinguished by, and come the 4 rubrics. A, consistent, destructive, scapegoating behavior, which can often be quite subtle. 2, excessive, although usually covert, intolerance to criticism and other forms of narcissistic injury. 3, pronounced concern with a public image and self-image of respectability, contributing to a stability of lifestyle, but also to pretentiousness and the denial of hateful feelings and vengeful motives. And lastly, intellectual deviousness with an increased likelihood of a mild schizophrenic-like disturbance of thinking at times of stress. And to help those who aren't familiar with the psychobabble here, oftentimes people think of multiple personality disorder or a split in the self, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, as schizophrenia. It isn't. It's the breakdown of the context and syntax of language itself. So, let's name what's going on. It's got to begin with naming what's going on. Let's call a godfather a godfather. Let's call a crime family a crime family. Let's call out greedy cowards as greedy cowards. They seem to enjoy name calling. Okay then, let's call a tramp a tramp. Let's call a George III wannabe a George III wannabe. Let's take back our Constitution and demand through the ballot that our voices be heard, that we demand creativity in government, and that we are tired of conflict. And let's start now. Thank you.